All right, greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get into the book of Numbers. This will be a little bit of an overview type of video. And whereas when I did the Leviticus one, I kind of did it as a recap on the tail end. So I thought for this time, we're not even halfway into Numbers yet. Thought I would do a little overview of the book of Numbers and bring out some key points that occurred in chapters 11 and 12 that I think are pretty fundamental for us to understand as we progress through the rest of the book. And yes, I know today's readings was on 13 and 14, but I was trying to get this recorded last night to be in line with our readings from 11 and 12 because 11 and 12, like I said, there's just some key content there that I'm going to focus on in this video. And so, with that being said, let's just dive right in. So, some thoughts on the book of Numbers, a little bit of an overview to give you kind of a heads up on the trajectory of the rest of the book so that you kind of know what type of content to expect and what type of key themes and events we're going to be encountering here. Numbers has a lot more narrative in it than the book of Leviticus did, which I know a lot of people are going to be pretty happy about. Those law codes are pretty tough to read. And so, first, Numbers begins where Leviticus leaves off. And if I didn't state this clearly in the Leviticus video, the book of Leviticus is primarily law codes that are designed to promote holiness for God's people. But part of that holiness includes preparations for remaining a distinct and moral culture as God is preparing to lead them into Canaan, a land that is composed of many cities who worship false gods, and they're just saturated with immorality. These laws that were given in the book of Leviticus and some more supplemental ones throughout the book of Numbers are designed to prepare the Israelites to live in a land that is totally surrounded by not just physical enemies, but spiritual enemies. And so these law codes, they are in a way, in a sense, they are a form of spiritual warfare, just as much as they are about preparing for holiness, because holiness being that level of distinctness and set apartness, that holiness has to come in a way of God preparing his people to remain pure and moral when they are going into a land that is saturated with every flavor of evil imaginable. It would be kind of like dropping a Christian into Las Vegas and then thinking, what rules would you give that Christian to live by to ensure that that Christian does not sin in a city that thrives on profiteering sin? And so, in that type of setting, we might expect there to be a little bit more stricter standards of behavior and attitude and conduct in that type of setting where sin is so saturated 360 degrees, then perhaps you would need, as a good old boy out on the farm, where you're not as totally surrounded and just totally all encompassed by sin. So that's kind of what God's doing with Leviticus. And so the book of Numbers is kind of an extension on that. And so Numbers, it gets its name in English Bibles because of the census data that we read in the first handful of chapters, where there's the census of the tribes, but then there's also a specific way of organizing those tribes to prepare them for their movement into Canaan. And so the census plays a specific role in the organization of the people. But the Hebrew title for the book of Numbers is actually Bamidbar, and Bamidbar means in the wilderness or in the desert. And that title is much more accurate to the prevailing theme and the prevailing content that we see in the book. It's not just a book of numbers per se, although the numbering of the people is a significant part of the storyline. The overall theme and key event of the book of Numbers is in the wilderness, and as reflected as such in the Hebrew title for the book. And now, as I said, the opening census data, it is an extension of the law codes in that this data and its related organization of the tribes of Israel was done to help prepare them for a mass migration into Canaan, where they're going to have to fight together with the Lord's help, to achieve victory over those Canaanite enemies. And so that entry to Canaan, however, is delayed, and it is delayed by about 40 years. I'm sorry, I keep kind of glancing over to the live stream settings. I have my live stream settings over here on this other screen, and things keep jumping around here, and I'm just still not familiar yet enough with Facebook to know how all of this works. This is only like my third or fourth time live streaming, um, and so I'm trying to figure out. Okay, everything's still streaming fine. Um, Let me see what's going on here. Okay. No, okay. Everything looks like it's still going good with the live stream. I'm sorry for that delay. I kind of got derailed there, flashing things over there. I wanted to make sure it was still recording. So anyway, back to our text in Numbers. So God's prepared the people now to enter Canaan, but that entrance is delayed by 40 years. You see, God is ready to lead them into the promised land, to give them all that was promised. But by chapter 14, and if you've done today's readings, you've witnessed this. By chapter 14, that all changes. God was ready. He had them right there at the precipice. He's ready. The land of milk and honey, it's about to be theirs. But the people fear the Canaanites. They don't trust Moses. They don't trust God. And they want to return to Egypt. And so, as punishment for this lack of faith, God sends them into the wilderness for 40 years so that the entire generation of adults um, will die before he allows them into Canaan. Only two survive that 40-year time period, and it's two of the two faithful spies, Joshua and Caleb. They're the only ones that are allowed to see the promised land. And so there's poetry in this punishment that God gives Israel of not allowing them into Canaan and delaying that entry for 40 years. The poetry is that one of the main fears that Israel had in entering Canaan was for the sake of their children being harmed during the upcoming battles against the Canaanites. And so that lack of faith and that fear for their children's sake, God ensures that only those children will be the ones to set foot in the promised land, because it was the parents that lacked faith. And so most of Numbers is actually about the events kind of immediately before, during, and then immediately after the 40 years of wandering. 40 years of wandering in the wilderness stems from Israel's disobedience and their lack of faith. Now, I wanted to do this video related to our text in chapters 11 and 12, yesterday's reading, because those two chapters, I believe, in my opinion, really truly foreshadow the rest of the book. And that's in these chapters, we see the true heart of Israel before they fully rebel against Moses in chapter 14. And it goes downhill drastically after that. And so I wanted to share a couple observations from 11 and 12, just broad picture from those chapters. And so, hey, because I'm getting this video out a day late, if you want to go back and reread 11 and 12 in relation to these points, please, by all means, do so. And maybe you have picked up on some other key points from these chapters that perhaps I missed. And if you've done that, hey, please feel free to let me know in the comments. So, as we go back to 11 and 12, a question might come up. Why is God so angry? Why is God so angry? Because his response to Israel's lack of faith and their lack of trust in him, when they complain, their complaints are met with a swift and severe judgment from God, ranging from the death penalty to disease. And God he's so angry, dare we say wrathful, dare we say just, because of their lack of faith. Remember, their lack of faith comes despite having seen all the power of God during the events of the Exodus. The freedom that came from the Egyptians, the plagues that God orchestrated, the way that he symbolically, if not in a sense literally, that's a discussion for another day, defeated the gods of Egypt, the Pharaoh of Egypt, despite the passing through the Red Sea, Despite being led to the very precipice, they're on the edge of the promised land. They are about to receive the blessings that were promised through the Abraham covenant. Despite God speaking directly to Moses and displaying his power and his presence to the Israelites through the cloud of fire, despite all of these countless evidence, the Israelites they still complain. It's still not good enough for them. What more could they want? And so here's the problem with Israel's heart that's revealed in this passage. It seems that Israel would prefer to be slaves to evil with full bellies than to be free for righteousness but with empty bellies. See, in chapter 11, they're complaining about being hungry once again. And so these complaints show that they not only lack a trust in God, but they actually prefer life under an evil foreign ruler who practiced infanticide, who practiced idolatry, who was guilty of any number of unlisted other sins. So long as they had their daily comforts, they would rather be living under evil rule, but with daily comforts, than to live for the righteousness of God. Does that sound familiar to anybody? See, the long forgotten American vigor of give me liberty or give me death, it was certainly not within Israel. And it's a rare thing even today in the United States as well. And Israel, they did not desire God. They did not desire righteousness. They did not desire holiness. They only cared about that immediate, that right now, temporary satiation. And this could be an important reminder for all of us, because many times in life, we might find ourselves in the position where life would be much easier, be much nicer, be more comfortable if we could just let other people enjoy their sins. Let's just quietly, personally, privately acknowledge God in our own thoughts and never confess him, never profess him, never seek his goodness, so that the world around will never harm us, they'll never challenge us, and we can continue keeping our comforts. I said we must desire God truly and completely with a willingness to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness above all else, even if that means those who practice infanticide, those who practice idolatry, might seek to do us harm. Now, James chapter 1 tells us to count our trials as joy because they test our faith. It is these trials that are actually opportunities to strengthen us. In Romans chapter 10, we see that Paul clearly commands that. It's whoever confesses. That's a public proclamation, not a private prayer. Whoever confesses Jesus will be saved. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says that we are to seek his kingdom first and to not worry about temporal things like food and clothing. So why do I share these passages for this text here in Numbers? It's because Israel, they don't want the freedom that can be found in God alone if it means physical hardship in their lives. And we can all be guilty of that too. It's something that Paul writes about in Romans 6 when he deals with this perceived paradox of well, if God gives us grace, then that means we can keep sinning, because the more that we sin, the more gracious God is. So that's our blank check to just keep sinning. And the tail end of Romans chapter 5 and then all of chapter 6 addresses that falsity. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? By no means. May it never be. God forbid. No, absolutely not. And so we see the analogy that Paul gives in Romans 6 is that those that have been baptized into Christ, do you not know that you've been united with him into his death so that God may raise you into a newness of life? And in that newness of life, we are free. We are freed from the bondage of sin, but that freedom from sin means that we are to be servants to righteousness. See, true freedom means having the ability to do the right thing. We see Paul draws that out in Romans 6. But back to our text. And so we need to always, personally, seriously, count the cost of what being a faithful Christian means and make that decision to pursue the goodness of God no matter what. Now, a second point from Numbers chapter 11 and 12 that I want to draw out is this, and it's the burden of leadership that Moses faces in chapters 11 and 12. We see that he must deal with the complaints from all of Israel, to include those from his own brother and sister who challenge his integrity. And this burden is so great that he actually asks God to take his life so that he would no longer have to carry the burden of being the leader for the nation. And this reveals a few important things. One, it asks us to question, how could Satan be using people in our lives to pull us away from God? Because Moses' bleak outlook on life, it comes from being totally surrounded by people who are not trusting in God. And their lack of faith, it weighs very heavily on Moses. And think about in your own life, how many peers and friends and family do you have whose lives are not full of faith in God? Does being around such people make it harder for you to speak openly and confidently about your faith in Jesus? If not, hey, that's awesome. Send me some tips on how you do that. Because I'll be honest with you, there are times when I struggle with this too. It is not easy being in places where you're the only Christian. Or not even just the only Christian, but the only person who is really, really putting their faith first in all aspects of their life. So we ought to let this example of Moses be a reminder to us of the influence that our peers can have on us. Now, secondly, this also shows the great burden of leadership. The shepherd must learn to lean on the Lord to strengthen him to continue tending to even the most stubborn of sheep. And so, in this way, leadership, it kind of reminds me of a quote about parenting that I heard a while back that really, really hit hard for me. I mean, it really it hit me deep in the heart when I heard this quote. And it was this quote: parenting is easy. Good parenting is hard. And the longer that I'm a parent, the more true that statement is. And in like manner, leadership is easy, but good leadership is hard. You see, good leadership listens to those he leads. A good leader, his heart is filled with concern and compassion for them. He genuinely desires to help them, and that type of leadership is exhausting. If you only even have one person that you're in charge of, say like a parent to a child, much harder still would be to lead a spiritual organization, to lead an entire church, to lead a nation. It's only through the Lord's strength and wisdom that we can learn to lead with integrity and with endurance. Now, that being said, this lesson on the burden of leadership should also really, really motivate us and challenge us to always be proactive in seeking to give due respect and honor to the leaders in our lives. We need to thank them often. We need to give them encouragement. We need to do things voluntarily to help them in some way, to encourage them, to let them know that they are making a positive difference in your life, in the lives of others. Giving those types of compliments, those types of words of encouragement, and other types of deeds that you might be able to think of that could help the leaders in your life, even just simple remarks of gratitude and thanks. These things help sustain leaders. And these types of things can be the very way that God works through you to bless and strengthen these leaders. And so the last point from Numbers is going to be a very specific one, and that's from Numbers 11, verse 29. Numbers 11, verse 29. And in 11:29, we see that the disobedience from Israel, it continues. God has answered Moses' prayer for support, and so God allows the appointment of elders, 70 elders, to help Moses with the toll of leadership and the burden of leadership. And we see even those elders fall short. And so Moses' frustration is once again hitting a peak, and he very frustratingly remarks that he wishes God would make all the people prophets, and that he would give all the people his spirit, so that he would no longer have to be the leader. And folks, this is what we call divine foreshadowing here, because this is exactly what happens with the coming of Christ and the institution of the new covenant. You see, today, all Christians do receive the Spirit. It is a promise from God to us in Acts 2, verse 38. Whoever repents and is baptized for the forgiveness of sins will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. We see that everyone who is a repentant and baptized believer has the Spirit of God with him, and are therefore responsible for living as a spiritual leader and living an upright life by walking with the Spirit, walking Spirit-led lives. Galatians 5:22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These are the fruits of the Spirit. But the context of that passage in Galatians chapter 5 deals with walking with the Spirit, living Spirit-led lives. We're living Spirit-led lives when we make things like love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faith and gentleness and self-control. When we make these things the priority in how we are going to live our lives, that is what it is to live Spirit-led lives. But furthermore, we have the Great Commission from Jesus in Matthew 28, verses 19 through 20, when Jesus remarks, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always till the end of the age." What we see here in this commission from Jesus is that all Christians are called to act as prophets. We are all called to speak for God by sharing the gospel of Christ. That's what we are to do. So Christians are Spirit-filled people who act as prophets in the world to share God's message of Christ. You see, Moses' desire in Numbers 11:29 is fulfilled in the New Testament with the inception of Christ's church. What Moses wanted for the people of Israel is exactly what we have as the church today. Let's not take that for granted. So, we're 23 minutes in. So, to conclude on this overview of Numbers, after giving the law codes in Leviticus and taking the census data in the early chapters of Exodus, in the early chapters of Numbers, God has now prepared the Israelites to conquer the very rich, the fertile, the land of milk and honey that is Canaan. And the residents who lived there were immoral beyond measure, and God is using the Israelites as an arm of divine justice to take back that land from wickedness, and then to bless the nation of Israel for their faith and for God honoring the Abrahamic covenant. However, Israel falters. They don't trust God, much less they don't trust Moses, And as a result, God punishes the Israelites by delaying their entry into the promised land by 40 years to ensure that the only people that would enter the promised land would be the children of the disobedient parents. And so, though this is a largely historical account with little like direct prophecy related to Jesus, we do see a very profound element of foreshadowing in Moses' prayer in chapter 11, verse 29, that will be fulfilled by the way that God orders the operation of Christ's church. That to become a Christian involves receiving the Holy Spirit, but to be a Christian also comes with the divine responsibility of acting as a prophet who will be speaking God's word of the gospel of Christ to all nations and to sharing that word. We all are appointed with that divine responsibility. So that's it for now. That's it for the book of Numbers. I'm going to say blessings to you all on your continued readings. Hopefully you'll find that the book of Numbers is a very frustrating book at times because of the narrative account, because of the failures of Israel. But as I mentioned in a video that I posted yesterday, a shorter video, on the importance of gratitude and counting our blessings, it's easy for us to look back and look down on the Israelites and say, how dare you not trust in God? Well, that's easy for us to say in our 21st century world where we have refrigerators full of food, we have drinkable water on tap, we have climate controlled houses that were lived in, we have medical care usually just minutes away at local clinics. We have so many luxuries, so many blessings today that make life comfortable for us. And if we were to strip every single one of those away, how many of us would still be able to rely fully on God when He is asking us to march into a foreign territory with absolutely no guarantee other than His own word of your safety? And that is a hard thing to do. And I only pray that I would have the faith to obey God, just as Moses, just as Joshua. Not that they were perfect, but that they did their best to keep the faith, and I pray that you would as well. But I say that just to say, count your blessings, but don't ever count your blessings in such a way that it's going to cause you to look down on others because you don't know what they're going through. Those Israelites, they were wrong for abandoning their faith. I'm not trying to make excuses for them. They were wrong. But boy, they had a lot harder time in the times that they were living than we do today. And we just can't really comprehend how difficult of a task it would have been for them. It was possible. They could have done it. They should have done it. They didn't. That's where they messed up. But let's not be too harsh in our criticisms with them. So that's where I'm going to end it for today. Count your blessings. I'm thankful for you guys in this daily Bible reading group. It's been an encouragement to me. Please keep the comments coming. Even if I don't add comments on every post, please, I read every comment that you guys post. So keep them coming. I appreciate you all. Love you guys. Blessings to you all. And happy readings.